the economy is incredibly important and it works hand in hand with the government. The answer for how to manage the economy of this new country showed up just in the nick of time. In 1776, the same year that the Declaration of Independence was issued, a college professor in Scotland published a book called The Wealth of Nations. This was written by Adam Smith, the father of the modern free market economy. He His model of free enterprise and unfettered trade was first tried in America. He came up with the idea, we put it into practice here. And there were kind of four fundamental laws of economic freedom that were encapsulated in his work. The first is the freedom to try. You have the freedom, if you have an idea, to pursue it. It might be crazy. It might be as crazy as we're going to send messages over a wire using electricity. We're going to try it. Guess what? People here had the freedom to try that. You have people like the Wright brothers who were not college educated. They were bicycle manufacturers. They had a bike shop and they made bikes and sold them. They had the freedom to say, you know what, we don't really have the right credentials. We don't play in all of the really fancy engineering circles, all the people who are trying to solve the problem of flight, but we think we can do it. We're going to try. And they did. They not only tried, but they were the first to come up with an airplane that could be controlled safely and was functional in a real way. The second economic freedom is the freedom to buy. You can buy what you want. If there's something you want, go for it. You don't have to go check in with some government magistrate. You don't have to show any kind of a card that says, look, here's my ration card. You can buy what you want to buy. The third principle of economic freedom is the freedom to sell. If there's something you have or that you can make that you would like to sell to somebody else, you can do that. You can do that. If you want to make bikes and sell it, go for it. If you want to make iPhones and sell it, go for it. You don't have to go double check with somebody else first. Hey, I've got this idea. Is it okay if I sell this? And you got to go through a process and get approved. That doesn't exist or shouldn't exist in a free market. And the fourth economic freedom, and this one's important, and we have completely lost sight of this one in America the past decade or so. The fourth economic principle of economic freedom is the freedom to fail. You know, during the Great Recession, when the government swooped in and bailed out these banks that were on the brink of failing, they were huge banks. And yeah, the impact of that would have been really, really painful. But when that freedom of those banks to fail was eliminated, that felt wrong. And I couldn't really put my finger on what it was. I couldn't put my finger on that principle, but this is it. This is that principle. The freedom to fail in a free economy is so important. If you have an idea and you try it and it doesn't work, it's not a viable option, or you overstretch yourself and you make poor business decisions, which was the case of the banks prior to the Great Recession, then that freedom to fail is vitally important. Bad behavior or bad products should be rewarded as such and should be cleaned out to make way for those who will do it right, who will make a better product, who will behave better. So the freedom to fail is just enormously important. And the more that we remove that incentive, that fear of failure, because, hey, if I get big enough, the government will step in and fix it for me. When that becomes the mentality, then we have an economy that is encumbered more and more by dead weight. And it slows things down, and it has. I remember looking at the situation with the Great Recession and looking at that and thinking, we're going to see, I don't know how long it's going to take, but we're going to see that there is some impact of this problem of bailing these banks out. I don't know exactly what it is, but we're going to realize someday what it is. Well, we're living it today. As a result of that bailout, the government lowered interest rates to make it really easy for banks to lend to each other and get capital. These banks that had made terrible lending decisions all of a sudden had the floodgates open to be able to get capital. And since that point in 2008, when they brought interest rates down to zero or close to it, it stayed there. Normally what would happen is you would do that for a short time, And then you'd slowly raise interest rates back up to a reasonable level. We never got to that point where we were strong enough that we could do that because we kind of had a lot of this dead weight that should have been allowed to go by the wayside. So now we're at a position where we have rampant inflation. And the way you control inflation is to raise the interest rates. But our economy hasn't strengthened enough to the point because government's been propping it up this whole time. It isn't strong enough to where we can increase interest rates to curb inflation without tanking the economy and throwing us into a recession, if not a depression. So, because we can see the direct result of this now. We're in this no-win situation, and I don't care what any political candidate says. No incoming candidate has the tools to fix this problem. We're going to have to just suffer through it because the way you control inflation is to bring up interest rates. You bring up interest rates, it slows the economy down, and we were in a bad spot to begin with. So, again, yes, the intention was good. We're going to save some pain from the common people, but whenever you violate a principle in order to save pain today, that pain is going to be compounded in the future, and we get to live that now, of that real example of violating this principle of the freedom to fail. And just to kind of give you a picture of how well Adam Smith's program worked and how well the American experiment worked with free market economy, by 1905, so this was 120-ish years after the Constitution had been ratified, the United States of America had 5% of the Earth's continental land area and about 6% of the world's population. So land, yeah, United States is big, but compared to the rest of the land in the world, 5%. Pretty big population, and a lot of people had come to the United States, but it still was only 6% of the world population. But by 1905, the United States of America was producing more than half of almost everything on the planet. That's incredible. This free market economy worked, and not only did it work, but it worked incredibly well. And the United States was richer than any country in history. It was able to help more countries than any country had been able to in the past because it had been allowed to just thrive under this free market system. Now, government does have some role to play in a free market system, and let's talk about what some of those are. The government should be there to help prevent and protect against illegal force in the market, compelling someone to buy or sell certain things. Okay, the government should prevent someone from holding a gun to your head and forcing you to buy something. And this is one of the reasons why the forced purchase of insurance, health insurance by the federal government was a problem. That was ruled unconstitutional because the government's supposed to be protecting against forced purchasing. And here it was passing a law that required you to purchase something. The second thing that the government is supposed to protect against is fraud. There should be systems in place to make sure that someone's not coming in and telling you that what you're buying is one thing when really it's a fraudulent thing. It's of lesser quality. So there is a role to play there to make sure that people have confidence when they're buying something that they know what they're getting. That's really crucial for goods and services to flow freely, is trust in what you're getting. The government should also be in charge of protecting against monopolies. So if you have companies that are coming together, or one company that gets so large that they're able to exert complete market dominance, kill competition, set prices at whatever they want, and the forces of supply and demand have no sway, it's the government's responsibility to go and break that up and preserve free markets, preserve the pressures of supply and demand. And the fourth thing that the government has a role in a free market is to prevent debauchery. Now, this seems really strange to us in America today because in many cases, it seems the government promotes debauchery in some cases. But for a long time in our history, it was the government's job to make sure that we're not promoting the sale and purchase of things like pornography, drugs, prostitution. There are some things that decay a society morally, and the government should prevent those from having free access to be bought and sold. And this was the system that we operated under up until the 1920s. In the 1920s, There was an anti-founding movement. The founding fathers came under attack. The free market economy espoused by Adam Smith came under attack. Um, People believed that those ideas were old and outdated. The 20s in particular, called the Roaring 20s, our country, we thought we were invincible. We were it. We were the thing, and we were. I mean, we were producing more than half of everything with a fraction of the population. We got prideful and we thought, yeah, those ideas worked before, but we can come up with new, better ways of doing things now. And so the founding fathers and Adam Smith got kicked out, and in came Karl Marx. Now, in the 1920s, it wasn't obvious yet what an evil communism was. It was kind of new to the scene um, during the First World War in the teens. Russia was just starting to experiment with communism, and it was starting to pop up all over Europe. And this was seen as, again, man, great intentions. We want everyone to have equal things. We want everyone to be taken care of equally. And that sounds great on the surface, but when you take away property, then all the things that we've already talked about, the incentive to work hard, go away. And what you end up with is misery and poverty every single time. It's worked out that way. But we didn't know that in the 1920s. So when we come out of the 1920s, we come into the Great Depression, we've already kind of kicked the founders to the curb, and it opened up our country to be susceptible to ideas like communistic thinking, where it's the government's job to take care of everybody, where the government can take and grab all this land and it gets to decide what to do with it. The government's going to provide all this welfare. It was kind of in that seed bed of we're too good for the founding principles that all of these seeds were planted. And what we have today, there are elements of a free market economy, but there are lots of elements of socialist economic practices as well. We don't have a free market economy. So when you hear things like the free market is dead, it doesn't work anymore, don't believe it. It did work. The reason why it's not working currently is because we've adulterated it. We've spoiled it. We've mixed it with something else and it's not pure. It worked great until we started trying different things. When we started violating the principles of what had made us successful, things got worse. And it happens every single time. You cannot violate eternal truth and expect to have better outcomes.